Good evening, friends. Tonight we'll drift quietly through time. Dim your lights, settle under your blanket, and let the soft hum of history lull you. If this calm journey helps you unwind, maybe tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right, and only if your eyelids are still open. Now, breathe in slowly. The story begins long before flags and colonies, before anyone called this vast place America. Imagine gentle waves brushing a shoreline older than any map. You and I are standing there barefoot in cool sand, listening to a rhythm that hasn't changed in 10,000 years. Let me tell you a quiet story, not of kings or conquerors, but of campfires and footprints fading in tide foam. When we speak of how America was really colonized, our minds often leap to wooden ships with European sails. But the first arrivals came much, much earlier, with no fanfare at all, just families following herds across a bridge of ice and wind. Picture it, the world in the deep chill of the last ice age. The air smells faintly metallic, like snow before it falls. A small band of people, wrapped in furs that whisper when they move, crosses a frozen expanse we now call Beringia, a land bridge that once joined Siberia to Alaska. No passports, no declarations, only patience. Each step is deliberate, cautious. The ice sighs beneath their weight. In the distance, a reindeer snorts, sending up a little cloud of breath like morning mist. They follow it, because following food is simpler than following glory. I imagine one of them pausing to look up. The sky stretches endless, stars bright enough to hear. Maybe he or she, because who really led whom, wonders what lies beyond the next ridge. That thought, more than any flag or decree, is the seed of colonization. Curiosity wrapped in survival. Thousands of years pass in the blink of a dream. The glaciers retreat, rivers wake up, forests yawn into being. Those same families scatter like seeds along valleys and coasts, learning every texture of this vast continent. Tundra, prairie, desert, jungle. They become hundreds of nations, speaking languages shaped by wind and water. If you listen closely in your imagination, you can still hear the murmur of their campfires, the clack of shells, the laughter that comes before sleep. I like to think the first settlements weren't so different from a modern picnic, minus the cooler. Someone tends a fire, someone else worries about the weather. A few children toss pebbles and invent the first boredom. There's comfort in that ordinariness. History, at its heart, is mostly people trying to stay warm and find dinner. Now drift with me to the year 1491, a date often overshadowed by the one that follows. The continent is alive with trade routes invisible to European maps. Copper from the Great Lakes glints in Florida sunlight. Obsidian from Mexican volcanoes lies in a Californian pouch. Communities rise like constellations, Cahokia, Teotihuacan, Tenochtitlan, each pulsing with rhythm and ritual. None of these people think of themselves as discoveries. They are the center of their own maps. Meanwhile, far across the Atlantic, ships creak in harbors, and cartographers argue over the shape of the world. They ink dragons where their ink runs out, as if warning future sailors, here be imagination. And somewhere, a sailor named Christopher Columbus sharpens his ambition like a butter knife. Useful, but not quite accurate. He believes he can reach Asia by heading west, a bit like deciding to reach the kitchen by walking through the neighbor's garden. Spoiler, he won't find the spices he's looking for. Imagine the night before he sails, the dock smell of tar and salt. Lanterns sway like sleepy eyes. The crew mutters prayers, half to God and half to luck. A gull screeches, unimpressed. Columbus dreams of gold, though he'd settle for applause. As he drifts to sleep, he cannot know that entire civilizations already hum beyond the horizon, ready, or not, to be folded into his story. When his ships finally bump against Caribbean sand in 1492, history books call it a discovery. But really, it's a collision, like two drifting logs meeting midstream. The Taino people greet the strangers with food and curiosity. Columbus, in turn, takes notes, and then takes everything else. It's the beginning of an encounter both tragic and oddly human, filled with misunderstanding and stubborn optimism. Yet I like to linger on the quieter details. The soft flap of canvas drying in the sun, the smell of roasted cassava, the hiss of waves licking a wooden hull. Imagine lying there on that beach, the sand cool beneath you, half listening to unfamiliar words and half to the endless sea. History, at that moment, is simply background noise for someone's nap. Centuries compressed like pages turning. Explorers come and go, Spanish, Portuguese, French, English, each leaving behind echoes and occasionally recipes. Somewhere in all this bustle, the first American stew is probably simmering. Maize, beans, something that once flew. An unrecorded cook tastes it and adds more salt, becoming unknowingly the first fusion chef of the New World. We rarely give them credit, but every culture's arrival was seasoned in a pot before it was written in a treaty. I remember reading that by the early 1500s, Spanish horses were already galloping across the plains, their hooves startling buffalo, who had never seen anything run on so few legs. For many indigenous peoples, that first sight of a horse was almost mythical, part deer, part thunder. And for the horses, I suppose, the first sight of endless grass was its own paradise. In a way, they colonized too, munching westward without needing permission. As you listen, let your mind wander over that landscape. Forests dense with whispering leaves, rivers braiding silver paths, mountains blushing under dawn. Somewhere, a village wakes to the smell of wood smoke and boiled corn. Children chase each other through morning mist, while elders tell stories that already sound ancient. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the thump of a drum echoing through time. A heartbeat that never really stopped. Then faintly, the creak of another ship. New accents drift ashore, carrying words like settlement and mission. They plant crosses and crops in the same holes. They write letters home describing the land as empty, though the smoke of dinner fires curls from every valley. I sometimes wonder if the real colonization wasn't of land, but of imagination, the urge to redraw what others already knew. By 1607, the English found themselves on the coast of Virginia, establishing Jamestown, a name that sounds heroic until you recall how hungry they were. Their diaries tell of drought, mosquitoes, and a diet best described as creative. One wrote about eating leather, another tried the local roots and discovered why locals didn't. Yet somehow they survived, proving that stubbornness is history's favorite seasoning. I like to picture those first winters. Wind pressing against crooked huts, the river icing over with the quiet authority of nature, a man poking at a small fire, wondering why he ever left home. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the palisade, a Powhatan family listens to the same wind, wondering the same thing. Across the cold night, two worlds breathe in rhythm, unaware they are writing a shared story one sigh at a time. As centuries yawn open, settlements multiply like stray cats. The Spanish build missions from Florida to California. The French drift down the Mississippi, naming places as if they were lullabies: Louisville, Baton Rouge, Belle Riviere. Every culture leaves a whisper, a word, a spice, a melody. The land absorbs them all, patient as ever. And so, when we ask how America was really colonized, the answer isn't a single event. It's a long exhale of migration and mingling, waves of people, ideas and mistakes lapping at each other. Colonization wasn't born with sails. It began with footsteps, campfires, and curiosity. Even now, in the hush of your room, you can feel those footsteps fading into the rhythm of your own heartbeat. The fire crackles low. Outside, night presses its cool cheek to the window. Take another slow breath. We've walked from ice to islands, from myth to maps. And as we leave this first shore behind, imagine the sound of distant oars dipping into calm water. They're carrying us toward the next chapter, where new explorers set out, not knowing they're a little bit lost. If you're still awake, hello again. If you've drifted a little, good. That means the story is doing its quiet job. Either way, let's loosen our grip on the blanket of time and let the current carry us into the age of maps, and of those who got them gloriously wrong. Imagine a dim workshop in Lisbon, around the year 1500. The air smells of candle wax and damp parchment. A man in a frayed tunic bends over a map so large it could double as a bedsheet. He dips his quill, squints, and draws another speculative coastline, one he has never seen, but has heard whispered by sailors, who might have been exaggerating between mugs of wine. Outside, gulls cry like gossiping neighbors. Inside, the cartographer mutters to himself, tracing dragons where his patience ends. Maps, you see, were once equal parts science and bedtime story. No satellite images, no GPS voice politely recalculating, just rumors tied together with ink and optimism. Every swirl of ink was a guess dressed as knowledge, and yet those guesses moved empires. Let me tell you about one of my favorites, the Cantino planisphere, drawn in 1502. It's gorgeous, colorful, and about as geographically accurate as a dream after cheese. On it, Brazil bulges like a ripe mango. Africa leans westward as if listening, and the Atlantic sprawls like a yawning cat. But for its time, it was revolutionary. The first glimpse that there might be more than one new world out there. The men who pored over it didn't see mistakes. They saw opportunities, like a child staring at an unopened gift. Now picture the sailors who set out with those maps rolled under their arms. They believed, sincerely, that the edge of the world was manageable. One more day's sail, perhaps two, and they'd find the shortcut to riches, or failing that, at least a place where the coconuts were polite. The sea, of course, had other plans. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sound aboard one of those ships. Wood creaking like a sleepy spine, sails puffing and sighing, a cook stirring a pot of something vaguely edible. Salt crusts your lips. Every horizon looks the same, and every man swears the compass is lying again. By 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon had already convinced himself that somewhere in Florida there was a spring that erased wrinkles and regret. He called it the Fountain of Youth, which, to be fair, sounds like a marketing pitch centuries ahead of its time. When he finally found Florida's marshy edges, the air heavy with cicadas and promise, he realized the only thing flowing freely was humidity. Still, the legend stuck. Even today, Florida seems to specialize in retirees seeking eternal youth, so perhaps he wasn't entirely wrong. Then there were the French, who drifted into Canada believing it was a shortcut to China. They were greeted instead by snow, silence, and indigenous traders wrapped in fur thicker than any Parisian coat. The French decided to stay anyway, founding places like Quebec. part settlement, part experiment in how many layers of wool a human can wear before becoming part sheep. Their maps called it New France, though to anyone watching, it looked mostly like Old Winter. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, cartographers argued about where America actually began. Some insisted it was just a southern island. Others stretched it north until it bumped into the Arctic. A few bold draftsmen added entire continents that would vanish with the next revision. In those candlelit rooms, the world expanded and contracted with every rumor that arrived by ship. It was like watching someone edit reality with a quill. I find something comforting in that uncertainty. In our world of instant updates, their mistakes feel almost tender. Proof that discovery once required imagination, not bandwidth. And maybe that's why their maps were decorated with sea monsters, because fear itself needed somewhere to live. A blank ocean invited too much anxiety, so they filled it with company. Sail with me now to 1521. A weary fleet under Ferdinand Magellan finally circles the globe, or tries to, depending on how many of the crew are still counting. Magellan himself doesn't survive the journey, but his maps do, inked with hard-won details, islands, straits, and margins full of size. Those maps become passports for the next wave of explorers who will inevitably misread them. Think of the misunderstandings piling up like layers of silt. The Spanish believe they've reached Asia. The Portuguese insist they're in Brazil. The English claim they discovered a new Virginia despite the people already gardening there. It's almost endearing, like toddlers arguing over who owns the sandbox, while the cat looks on, unimpressed. By the mid-1500s, European cartographers start adding more confident lines. They sketch the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi, the outline of South America's shoulders. But accuracy comes slowly, like a snail dragging a quill. When they can't confirm a shape, they invent one anyway. There's even a map that stretches California into a floating island. Proof that wishful thinking is the mother of geography. Back on land, colonists rely on these maps to find their way, which is a bit like using a child's doodle to navigate a forest. They get lost often, of course. One early English expedition in North Carolina wandered for days searching for their own camp, which they had accidentally placed on the wrong river. Imagine explaining that to your captain. Sir, we seem to have misplaced the colony. If there were GPS in 1587, it would simply sigh. Yet somehow, these misdirections birth stories that still drift through our culture. The lost colony of Roanoke, for instance, an entire settlement vanished, leaving only the word Croatoan carved into a post. Was it famine, flight, friendship, or fantasy? No one knows, and perhaps that's the point. The mystery itself became another kind of map, one that leads straight into imagination. Let's pause and feel the texture of that time. A parchment crackles under your fingertips. The ink smells faintly of walnut and sea. Somewhere a church bell tolls the hour, but nobody's sure which hour it is. A sailor dozes below deck, dreaming of green shorelines and bread that isn't salted to eternity. Above him, the navigator studies a map that insists there's a continent just beyond the next sunrise. He believes it, because to stop believing would mean turning back. That's the quiet heart of colonization. Faith, not just in God, but in guesswork. Every voyage was a lullaby of optimism, sometimes foolish, sometimes brave. And if you lean close, you can still hear the ocean murmuring its skeptical response. Now drift forward to 1602, when Dutch cartographer Petrus Plancius publishes a world map glowing with new confidence. He draws the Americas more clearly, sprinkles Latin names like seasoning, and still leaves generous oceans for the imagination. On one corner, he sketches a small angel blowing wind across the Atlantic, as if history itself needs a gentle push. I love that detail. It reminds us that behind every grand discovery was simply someone hoping for fair weather. Of course, not everyone trusted these fancy new maps. Many sailors preferred their own charts, greasy and stained, drawn from personal memory. They'd tuck them under the mattress, muttering that printed maps were for dreamers. And maybe they were right. For all their dragons and mistakes, the dreamers were the ones who redrew the world. Picture now a tavern in Seville, lamplight flickering over ale and ambition. A sailor brags that he's seen a land where the rivers sparkle with gold. Another insists he's found islands of friendly giants. Someone else nods sagely and adds, "Ah, yes, that's on the latest map." They all laugh, knowing the map probably lists mermaids as residents. Outside, the night air smells of orange peel and wood smoke. Inside, the age of exploration is still mostly an age of storytelling. And slowly, through all this guessing, the idea of America solidifies. Not one place but a collage of coastlines and confusion stitched together by ink. It spreads through Europe's imagination like candlelight chasing shadows. People dream of fields to farm, fortunes to find, freedoms to claim. The map becomes a mirror. Everyone sees what they need to see. As we drift towards sleep, let's look once more at that map glowing softly in candlelight. The parchment curls at the edges, tired from centuries of unfolding. Its colors fade, but the mistakes remain. Beautiful, human fingerprints on the face of the unknown. Somewhere between the dragons and the coastlines, a tiny ship sails forever toward a place it will never quite reach. That ship, I think, is us. Always searching, always imagining. The candle gutters low. Outside, the sea sighs against the harbour wall, steady as a heartbeat. Let that rhythm steady yours. We've wandered through a century of ink and illusion, through misdirections that somehow found their way. And now, as the maps fade into dreams, let's follow one more current, toward the next chapter, where the colonists finally come ashore with empty stomachs and full hopes. For tonight, rest easy knowing that even the world's biggest mistakes can look, in candlelight, a little bit like magic. Welcome back, traveler. If your blanket has shifted, tuck it close again. The wind outside might be real, or maybe it's just the faint rustle of time turning another page. Either way, let's sink back into the soft murmur of history, where ships have finally found land, and people are learning, sometimes awkwardly, how to live in a world that doesn't match their maps. Imagine you've just stepped off a creaking ship onto the edge of a continent that smells of pine, salt, and possibilities. The air is thicker than home, almost sweet with soil and seaweed. Behind you, the captain mutters something about New England, though there's nothing particularly English about the landscape. Before you, tall grasses ripple like whispers, and somewhere unseen, a bird calls out. A sound so different, it might as well be laughter. The year is around 1607, give or take a few sleepless nights. You've arrived at Jamestown, a patch of Virginia that will soon teach everyone the true meaning of the phrase, "We probably should have packed more food." The settlers are weary, but hopeful, their boots sinking into mud that clings like an over-enthusiastic handshake. They build huts out of whatever will stand still long enough. Timber, reeds, the occasional unlucky barrel. Each morning, they look around and wonder, is this what progress looks like? By evening, the answer is usually, progress is hungry. The first winter is less about discovery and more about creative dining. Records mention meals of boiled leather, roasted roots, and in desperate times, something politely called foraged protein. Imagine a supper table where someone sighs and says, "Remember bread?" And someone else stares into the pot and replies, "No, but I think I'm about to invent soup." Yet even in hardship, there's tenderness. One settler writes home describing how the firelight flickers across their faces at night, turning exhaustion into quiet companionship. He doesn't know his letter will take months to arrive, if it arrives at all. Still, he writes, because humans have always needed to tell someone, somewhere, that they were here. Now, not far from Jamestown, the Powhatan Confederacy watches all this with patient curiosity. They've seen storms come and go. These pale strangers are just another kind of weather. At first, they offer food, corn, fish, melons, gifts of survival that taste of generosity and cautious hope. But misunderstandings multiply faster than crops. One side speaks in trade, the other in conquest, and neither fully hears the melody beneath the words. History, as usual, will later summarize it with far too much certainty. But in these early days, it's mostly confusion served warm. I like to picture one of those shared meals, maybe autumn, maybe dusk. The air cool enough for breath to fog. A Powhatan woman ladles stew into a carved bowl. Beside her, an Englishman squints at it suspiciously, but takes a spoonful anyway. It's good, earthy, thick with beans and squash. He tries to thank her in broken Algonquian, probably mispronounces everything, and she laughs. A soft sound that bridges a small part of the enormous gap between them. For a moment, colonization pauses to eat dinner. Food, you see, is always the quiet diplomat of history. Long before treaties and borders, people traded flavors. The settlers brought wheat, barley, and goats. They received corn, potatoes, and knowledge. How to plant by the moon. How to find sweetness in a root. How to survive without importing everything. It's easy to forget that the first real American recipe was simply listen and learn. Over time, the colonies stretched north and south like slow spreading ink. The Pilgrims arrive in 1620, landing at Plymouth after an Atlantic crossing so rough they might have kissed the shore if they weren't too seasick. Their first sight is a grey November sky and a forest that seems politely indifferent to their prayers. Still, they kneel in gratitude, or maybe relief that solid ground doesn't sway. They build small houses, trade stories with the Wampanoag, and discover that corn pudding tastes better than cold salt pork. By the next autumn, they celebrate survival with a feast. What later storytellers will label the first Thanksgiving, though in truth, it's just one of many shared meals across countless cultures before and after. The feast lasts 3 days. Roast fowl, venison, corn mush, and laughter that drifts like smoke above the tables. Imagine the crackle of fires, the scent of roasted meat mingling with pine resin. Children chase each other through the leaves, while elders tell stories that twine history and myth. In that moment, no one is thinking about empires. They're thinking about seconds, perhaps thirds. As the 1600s roll onward, the colonies multiply. Each region invents its own version of normal. In New England, life revolves around church bells and chowder. In the South, plantations rise, their shadows lengthening into history's darker corners. In the middle colonies, Dutch and English settlers argue over bread recipes while pretending not to notice the French sneaking in from the north with better wine. Everywhere, people plant, pray, and patch their roofs with whatever doesn't leak. And always, there is the kitchen. Even in the humblest cabin, a pot simmers. Stew thick with cornmeal, or a thin broth laced with imagination. One woman writes in 1673 that she's tired of corn but grateful for it because it sticks to the ribs better than sorrow. That line stays with me. It reminds us that survival often has the flavor of gratitude. But life isn't just soup and sermons. The colonies bustle with barter and gossip. Traders haul beaver pelts, sugar, tobacco, and rumors. Ships come and go, bringing letters, diseases, and the occasional violin. Taverns become the beating hearts of towns, places where sailors boast, farmers grumble, and someone inevitably invents the rumor that will become next week's headline. Picture the glow of a tavern window on a snowy night. Inside, laughter rises like steam. Outside, the wind hums low across frozen fields. For a moment, the world feels both enormous and small enough to fit in a mug of ale. And yet, beneath all the warmth, tension simmers. Land ownership, trade monopolies, differing faiths, small cracks in the dream of unity. Still, for now, most people are too busy staying alive to argue properly. They build schools, plant orchards, and write letters home about this strange, beautiful, exhausting place where you can freeze and sweat in the same week. Across the continent, in Spanish territories, missions bloom like stone flowers. San Diego, Santa Fe, St. Augustine. Monks ring bells that echo across deserts, calling both to prayer and to curiosity. Somewhere, a native artisan carves patterns into a mission wall, blending cultures in quiet symmetry. Everywhere, the story of colonization is being written, not just by explorers and kings, but by cooks, builders, and children playing in dust. Imagine walking through one of those early towns at dusk. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. You hear the creak of a sign swinging over an inn, the murmur of someone tuning a fiddle. A dog trots past, confident in its ownership of the street. Far above, stars prick through the twilight, the same stars that guided ships and shepherds, and still somehow comfort us. History doesn't feel like history here. It feels like life, messy and ordinary. I often think about the people who didn't make it into the grand stories, the women who brewed beer because it was safer than water, the midwives who delivered both babies and advice, the enslaved Africans who built, cooked, prayed, and sang their endurance into the soil. Without them, there would be no colonies to remember. They are the quiet architects of every comfort we now take for granted. By the late 1600s, America is still less a nation than a patchwork quilt. Some squares warm, some frayed, all stitched together by need. Letters from Europe speak of it as a land of promise, though few mention the mosquitoes. A French visitor in 1687 notes with awe that the forests are so vast, one might wander a week and meet only deer and one overly confident squirrel. It's a funny image, but also a reminder that wildness still ruled more than ambition did. So when we talk about how America was really colonized, we might say it happened one meal, one mistake, one shared fire at a time. It wasn't the flags or the kings who made it possible. It was the hands that built, stirred, planted, and held on. Colonization wasn't only conquest, it was adaptation, improvisation, and sometimes friendship interrupted by fear. The fires burn low now, the settlers sleep, dreaming of home or tomorrow's hunt. Somewhere in the dark forest, an owl calls, and another answers. The river slides quietly past, carrying with it fragments of reflection, wooden shavings, bits of song, maybe the echo of a prayer, and you, listening, can drift with that river, letting the centuries smooth themselves out. Tomorrow, in our story, the colonies will grow louder, more ambitious, more entangled with the empires that sent them. But for now, stay here in this softer century, where soup still simmers, and the night smells of pine. Breathe in deeply, let it out slowly. History can wait. Dreams are impatient. Settle a little deeper into the pillow. Let your breath slow to the same tempo as a candle's sway. Tonight we drift into an era when colonies grew restless, merchants grew wealthy, and the world's empires learned to stir ambition with sugar and tea. It sounds glamorous, but don't worry. It's mostly paperwork, polite bickering, and a few spilled cups. The century is the 1700s, that comfortable middle ground where wigs are tall, tempers are short, and the Atlantic feels smaller by the week. Ships shuttle constantly between continents, carrying rum, cotton, tobacco, and gossip. Every harbour smells of salt and molasses, the perfume of empire. Somewhere in London, a clerk scratches notes by candlelight, dreaming not of adventure but of balanced ledgers. Across the sea, farmers bend over endless rows of tobacco, their sweat the invisible ink on every contract. Imagine a morning in Boston, 1725. The cobblestones glisten from last night's rain. A vendor hums a tune about nothing in particular. I walk, well, let's imagine we walk, past the harbour. Barrels are being rolled onto ships bound for the Caribbean. Sugar down, rum up, a triangular waltz of commerce. The air tastes faintly of yeast and tar. A sailor yawns, scratches his beard, and wonders aloud if England truly knows how far away England feels. By noon, the taverns begin to fill. Tea is fashionable, but ale is faster. Every conversation eventually circles back to taxes, because no matter the century, someone is always arguing about them. At this point, the colonies are still loyal, though loyalty, like warm bread, tends to stale if left out too long. Let's glance across the map. To the north, French settlers in Quebec sip hot chocolate thick as paint, certain their empire will last forever. To the south, Spanish governors write elegant letters home complaining that their soldiers keep melting in the heat. And far inland, countless indigenous nations continue to adapt, trade, and endure, their alliances shifting like river currents that no crown can chart. The continent hums quietly, full of stories unfolding beyond the official versions. The English, however, are obsessed with order. They build meeting houses, pass laws, and invent committees with impressive stationery. Tea becomes a ritual of reassurance, something predictable in a world that isn't. Picture a colonial kitchen around 1730. Pewter kettle whistling, small cakes cooling by the hearth, the faint crackle of firewood and conversation. Someone stirs sugar into their cup and sighs, unaware that these small comforts will soon fuel a revolution. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, life drifts along like a ship on a gentle tide. Merchants grow rich, artisans carve out reputations, preachers declare that virtue smells suspiciously like hard work. In Virginia, elegant plantations rise among the rolling fields, their owners reading European poetry while pretending not to see the enslaved people who make the poems affordable. In New England, whalers chase fortune through icy seas, returning with barrels of oil and stories nobody quite believes. And in Philadelphia, a printer named Benjamin Franklin experiments with lightning, libraries, and recipes for self-improvement. He writes that early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Personally, I'd add, and slightly dull at dinner parties. Across the ocean, England is sipping its own tea, blissfully unaware that its colonies are developing personalities. Policies are passed, taxes adjusted, parchment piled. Most of it seems reasonable in London and completely absurd in Boston. It's a mismatch made for history books. Still, ordinary life continues between the proclamations. Let's wander into a small print shop in 1750. The smell of ink is sharp and comforting. A boy turns a heavy wooden press, the gears clicking like a patient clock. Sheets of freshly printed news slide out. Stories of ships, auctions, and weddings, all delivered with the same solemn importance. Nobody knows yet that newspapers will become the tinder for revolution. For now, they're just tomorrow's wrapping paper. Around the same time, across the Appalachians, trappers and explorers push westward, trading musket balls for pelts. They carry maps that end mid-mountain, where someone has written, "Here be inconvenience." At night, they sit by fires, swapping tales of rivers that flow backward and fish that sing. Whether true or not hardly matters. The stories keep the dark away. And then, softly, inevitably, comes the sound of spoons in teacups turning into the rhythm of rebellion. The 7 Years' War ends in 1763, and Britain, triumphant but broke, decides its colonists should help pay the bill. Taxes on paper, sugar, stamps, and tea trickle across the Atlantic like unwanted drizzle. The colonies grumble politely at first. No one wants to upset the mother country. They just wish she'd stop checking their allowance. In coffee houses, people begin to talk faster and softer. Pamphlets appear with titles like Common Sense and letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. The idea of independence drifts through the air, faint at first, like the scent of bread from a distant oven. Most folks keep working, farming, sowing, hoping politics will blow over like bad weather. But weather, especially political weather, tends to linger. Picture Boston again, now 1773. The harbour is crowded with ships heavy with tea, the kind too expensive to enjoy guilt-free. On shore, men dressed in rough disguises whisper plans that sound suspiciously like theatre. That night, they slip aboard the ships, open the chests, and pour hundreds of pounds of tea into the dark water. The sea swallows it quietly, turning the harbour into the world's first herbal infusion. Somewhere, a gull yawns. History will call it protest, but to the fish below, it's probably just Tuesday. England is not amused. Parliament stomps metaphorical feet, sending soldiers and stricter laws. The colonies answer with meetings and more pamphlets. Between them stretches 3,000 miles of misunderstanding. If letters could glare, these would burst into flame mid-ocean. And yet, amid all the tension, life keeps a domestic rhythm. Someone is still kneading bread. Someone else is mending a sail. A child learns to write their name on the back of a worn ledger. History doesn't pause for drama. It seeps quietly through daily chores. I often imagine an evening in 1774. A family sits by the hearth, passing around a pot of tea made from local herbs. Mint, raspberry leaf, maybe a dash of rebellion. Outside, snow drifts against the shutters. Inside, the talk is gentle but firm. Should we stay loyal? Should we change? No shouting, just thoughtfulness. Change, like sleep, often begins in silence. Meanwhile, far from Boston, empires continue their own slow unraveling. Spain's hold on its territories weakens. France counts debts it can't repay. Across the Caribbean, enslaved communities whisper plans for freedom. The whole Atlantic world seems to be stirring, stretching, preparing to roll over into a new century. But tonight, let's linger in that calm before the storm. The tea is cooling. The candles are low. A cat curls near the hearth, purring like distant thunder. Outside, wind sighs against the windows, sounding almost like the sea that connects all these stories. Empires rise and fall, but bedtime has its own empire, ruled by the steady pulse of the heart. Take a breath with me. Inhale the faint scent of ink, sugar, and rain. Exhale the noise of politics, letting it fade into the hum of night. We've wandered through bustling ports and quiet parlors, through ledgers and letters, through the human habit of believing that tomorrow will make sense. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But for now, we can let history brew slowly, the way tea releases its flavor only when left alone. As the clock somewhere strikes an uncertain hour, picture the world tilting toward revolution, though no one knows it yet. The moon drifts above the harbor like a silver coin no one can quite reach. The waves whisper against the hulls of ships carrying the dreams and debts of nations. And as those ripples spread outward, so do the stories of freedom, of fear, of what happens when people decide to write their own maps again. Let your eyes grow heavy. Tomorrow's tales will bring musket smoke and declarations, but tonight it's enough to listen to the kettle's last sigh and the slow ticking of history's clock. The tea has gone cold, but its scent still lingers, sweet, faintly bitter, and strangely comforting. That's empire in a cup, powerful, fleeting, and perfectly ordinary. Now, drift with that thought. Let the candle gutter low. Let the pages turn themselves. We'll pick up the thread again soon, when revolutions stretch their arms and yawn into being. But for now, rest here at the table of time, where all the cups are empty and peace tastes briefly possible. Hello again, my patient traveler. If you've just woken a little, that's all right. History, like sleep, often comes in waves. We're in the late 1700s now, that hazy stretch of time when whispers of rebellion turned into footsteps and footsteps into fireworks. But don't worry, we'll take it slowly. Revolutions are noisy only if you stand too close. From here, in the dim light of a candle and the comfort of your blanket, it sounds more like rustling paper and the clink of teacups. Let's start in 1775, when the colonies are restless but still half asleep. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides, let's start a new country. It begins quietly. Petitions, letters, complaints written in tidy script by people who still sign your humble servant. There's a politeness to it all, as if they're apologizing for wanting freedom. But politeness, like tea, can only be steeped so long before it turns bitter. Picture the streets of Boston at dawn. The sky blushes grey-pink over rooftops. Somewhere, a blacksmith hammers rhythmically. Clink, clink, clink. The heartbeat of a town trying to look busy and calm. In a small tavern, a group of men huddle over mugs, their breath steaming in the chill. One says, they'll never listen. Another stares into his ale and murmurs, then we'll make them. Outside, a horse snorts and stamps, impatient for a journey that will one day be called historic. The first shots come in Lexington and Concord, though at the time, no one calls them the first anything. They're just moments, confusion, smoke, and the terrible noise of certainty. Farmers clutch muskets, soldiers shout, and the spring air fills with echoing questions. Who fired first? Why? What now? It's the sort of chaos that future generations will tidy up with tidy paragraphs. But in the moment, it's mostly fear and disbelief. War has begun, though it doesn't quite know how to walk yet. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the rhythm of that new uncertainty. Drums beating in muddy fields, the slow creak of wagons, the scratch of quills recording names that history will later rearrange. But behind all that, life continues. Someone still has to bake bread, patch coats, fetch water, comfort children. Even revolutions need breakfast. Now let's drift to Philadelphia, 1776. It's summer, and the air is thick enough to spread on toast. In a stuffy room, 50-odd men argue over sentences that will change everything. A fly buzzes lazily near the window, perhaps the only calm creature in the room. Thomas Jefferson adjusts his wig and rewrites the phrase, "We hold these truths." One more time. It's meant to sound grand, but under the quill, it's still just ink and hope. When the Declaration of Independence is finally read aloud, the crowd outside cheers, though some are just happy for fresh air. No one knows if it will work, but belief, it turns out, can be louder than cannon fire. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, King George III frowns at reports and wonders why his colonies are acting like teenagers with access to printing presses. He writes in his diary, "Nothing of importance happened today." Some historians think it was sarcasm. Others think he really meant it. Either way, history chuckles softly. The war drifts on, not in cinematic bursts, but in long stretches of waiting, marching, freezing, and writing letters that begin with "my dearest" and end with "pray for me." At Valley Forge, soldiers shiver through the winter of 1777, their breath frosting in the air like tiny ghosts of endurance. The snow squeaks underfoot. A pot of thin stew bubbles on the fire, smelling faintly of shoe leather and courage. General Washington walks among the tents, tall, silent, wrapped in resolve and a very inadequate coat. He says little, but his men keep going because he keeps going. Proof that leadership sometimes looks like simply not sitting down. If we peek inside one of those tents, we might find two soldiers sharing a crust of bread, talking softly about home. One from Virginia, one from Massachusetts, both wondering if they'll ever see spring again. Outside, the wind moans through the trees, shaking snow from the branches. It's a lullaby of endurance, rough and beautiful. When morning comes, they wake stiff but alive, and that, for now, is victory enough. Meanwhile, the war spreads like a rumor with good legs. Battles erupt in places whose names sound like lullabies: Saratoga, Trenton, Yorktown. Each one changes the story just a little. There are triumphs, losses, and long stretches where nothing happens except mud and mosquitoes. It's less about glory and more about persistence, that most unromantic of virtues. I sometimes think revolutions succeed not through passion, but through stubborn, yawning determination. In 1778, France finally decides to help, mostly to annoy Britain. They send ships, soldiers, and polite instructions on how to pronounce bonjour. The alliance changes everything, and also complicates everything, as alliances tend to do. But for the weary colonists, it feels like the world has tilted slightly in their favor. There's even a rumor that someone baked a celebratory pie, though the filling remains historically unverified. Let's pause for a quieter moment. Somewhere in the countryside, a young woman sits by candlelight, writing a letter to her husband at the front. She tells him that the garden is growing, the children are taller, and that she's proud, though she wishes the revolution would finish soon because the chickens are starting to miss him. Her words are steady, loving, ordinary. She folds the letter, seals it with wax, and sends it on its uncertain way. Perhaps it reaches him, perhaps it doesn't. But the act of writing is its own small victory. A reminder that even amid war, tenderness persists. As years drift on, the war becomes background noise to daily survival. Farmers plant crops between battles. Blacksmiths forge both horseshoes and bayonets. Slaves hear talk of freedom and wonder if the word will ever cross the plantation fence. Native nations negotiate impossible choices, trying to survive a conflict not of their making. Every side, every heart, carries its own quiet revolution. And then, slowly, almost reluctantly, peace begins to whisper. By 1781, the British Army, tired and far from home, surrenders at Yorktown. The field is damp, the air strangely polite. Drums roll low, flags dip. General Cornwallis, too ill or too embarrassed, sends his sword through an aide. Washington accepts it with solemn dignity, perhaps already dreaming of retirement and silence. There's no grand finale, just relief, exhaustion, and the sound of men realizing they might live. 2 years later, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed. The United States is officially born, though it still wobbles like a newborn foal. Maps are redrawn, toasts are raised, debts are ignored until later. Across the land, towns ring bells, though many people are too tired to come listen. Freedom, it turns out, feels remarkably similar to hunger, at least at first. I like to imagine one of those victory nights, a small farmhouse, a candle burning low, a family gathered around a table not much larger than a map. The father sets down his cup and says, "It's over." The mother nods, stirring a pot that smells of herbs and hope. Outside, crickets sing, blissfully indifferent to politics. A child asks, "What comes next?" Nobody answers right away, because what comes next is always the hardest part. The new nation stretches its arms and yawns, full of potential and confusion. 13 colonies stitched together by ideals, debt, and optimism. There are no kings now, only debates. And those, as anyone who's attended a town meeting knows, can be just as loud. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, elections. All those grand words are still decades from perfection. But for tonight, the stars shine over a free, uncertain people. And that is enough. If you listen closely, you can hear the faint clatter of printing presses, the hum of markets, the sigh of soldiers returning home to soil and silence. Some build homes, some plant orchards, some simply sit by rivers, letting the water wash away the memories of gunpowder and loss. The revolution continues quietly inside them, an inner shift toward peace, toward sleep. And now, as the century itself grows drowsy, so can you. Let the drums fade, the muskets dim to embers. Breathe in the scent of wood smoke and parchment. The war is over. The story has softened. We've crossed from rebellion into reflection. Tomorrow will bring new struggles, new frontiers, new arguments over what freedom truly means. But that's for another chapter. For now, picture a candle burning low on a wooden table, its flame steady and small. Outside, the night is vast and forgiving. Inside, someone hums a tune they don't quite remember, and the sound melts into the quiet heartbeat of a nation learning to rest. Close your eyes. History, like tea, is best when it cools. And as the stars drift over a world reborn, let their light lead us gently onward, to the next horizon, the next dream, the next sleepy century. Good evening again, dear listener. If your eyes are already half closed, let them stay that way. We've wandered together from icy bridges of prehistory to candlelit revolutions. Now, let's drift into the soft hum of the centuries that followed, the slow, sprawling echo of a new nation stretching westward, uncertain and dreaming. The year is somewhere around 1803, and America has just doubled in size overnight thanks to the Louisiana Purchase, a deal so good even history still squints at the receipt. Imagine a clerk in Washington reading the news and muttering, "We bought what exactly?" Across the ocean, Napoleon shrugs. He has other things to conquer. And so, without much ceremony, millions of acres of prairies, mountains, rivers, and possibilities become part of a country that hasn't quite learned how to pronounce itself yet. Picture the continent at dawn. Mist curls low over the Mississippi. Herons rise lazily from the reeds. Somewhere, a raft creaks against the current. The air smells of wet earth and sun-warmed grass. It's quiet, almost impossibly so. If you listen carefully, you can hear the echo of hoofbeats, the soft slap of paddles, the sigh of wind across plains that seem to go on forever. This is the age of exploration reborn. Only now, instead of crossing oceans, people are crossing time zones they don't know exist yet. Lewis and Clark set out in 1804 with journals, compasses, and a healthy disregard for sleep. Their expedition is part science, part optimism, part endurance test. They record rivers, sketch plants, mispronounce local names, and get lost politely. Somewhere along the trail, they meet Sacagawea, who becomes the calm at the center of their chaos, interpreter, guide, and living reminder that this land was never truly new. Her quiet strength threads through the story like a lullaby sung against wind. I like to imagine one of their campfires at night. The stars blaze sharp and countless overhead. Someone stirs a pot of stew, its scent mingling with pine smoke. Lewis scribbles notes by firelight. Clark snores softly nearby. The Missouri River murmurs its endless tune, carrying their reflections away like slow-moving lanterns. They have no idea they're becoming legends. They're just trying to keep the fire going and the mosquitoes at bay. As decades pass, the frontier keeps stretching, as if the horizon itself is teasing curiosity. Settlers move west with wagons full of dreams and very little else. Their wheels carve ruts into prairie soil, lines that will one day become highways. Children chase after the wagons, laughing, though the laughter fades in the wind. Every few miles, someone stops to build a house, a barn, a story. But colonization, in this quieter chapter, isn't only adventure, it's also consequence. For every family that gains a homestead, another loses one. Indigenous nations, whose roots run deeper than rivers, face treaties written in ink that vanishes under sunlight. Some resist, some adapt. Many are forced to move, carrying songs and memories westward like embers. The Trail of Tears winds through forests and silence, a journey of sorrow softened only by the human will to endure. Even here, we whisper the truth gently, because history, like a scar, is tender to the touch. Farther north, in the 1840s, gold glitters faintly in California's rivers. News spreads faster than reason, and soon thousands rush west, chasing fortune in the dirt. They bring shovels, dreams, and terrible campfire cooking. The mountains echo with hammering, laughter, and disappointment. Most never strike it rich, but they find something else. Community, resilience, or at least a good story to tell their grandchildren. And somewhere, between tents and saloons, the myth of the American West begins to hum itself into being. Let's pause for a moment on a dusty evening in San Francisco, around 1850. The city smells of salt, sawdust, and ambition. Lanterns sway above wooden walkways. Music drifts from a saloon window. In the distance, ships lie abandoned in the harbor, their crews having run off to dig for gold. A man sells coffee for $5 a cup, a small fortune, but worth it for a taste of home. Nearby, a woman runs a bakery, her hands dusted white with flour, her eyes weary but kind. The world may call this chaos, but she calls it Tuesday. And beyond all that noise, on quiet hills, families from China, Mexico, Ireland, and Africa are building small houses that look like hope. America, still young, is learning that colonization never truly ends. It simply changes accent. Cultures blend and clash and blend again, creating a symphony of smells, songs, and second chances. It's messy, imperfect, beautiful, like all human things. By the 1860s, that imperfect beauty strains under the weight of its own contradictions. Freedom, once the rallying cry, now divides the nation. The Civil War erupts, not as a sudden explosion, but as a long-held sigh breaking loose. Brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, the kind of heartbreak only family can cause. The battlefields are vast and muddy, the nights filled with the smell of smoke and damp grass. But even amid the thunder of cannons, small mercies flicker. A nurse offering water, a letter tucked under a blanket, a prayer whispered in the rain. When peace finally returns, it's quieter than anyone expected, more relief than triumph. Afterward, America begins to rebuild itself. One brick, one voice, one heartbeat at a time. Railroads snake across the continent, stitching coasts together with iron thread. Cities rise like dreams out of dust. Inventors tinker, poets write, and farmers keep planting. History, always impatient, races ahead. But we can slow it down for a moment here. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of the Pacific, feeling the last cool light of sunset touch your face. You followed centuries westward, and there is nowhere left to go but inward, into rest. Still, the echoes linger. They hum through the 20th century, the hum of factories, jazz clubs, radios, and highways. Each age colonizes something new, the sky, the moon, the mind. But the pattern remains the same: wander, wonder, build, break, rebuild. Somewhere in all that noise, the same question whispers, what are we becoming? And maybe, just maybe, the answer is softer than we think. I like to believe that colonization's final echo isn't conquest but curiosity. The gentle impulse to know, to connect, to share stories by firelight. If we listen carefully, we can still hear it. A mother reading to her child, a musician tracing old folk songs on a steel guitar, a traveler watching stars from a desert where silence still speaks. These are the quiet empires of kindness, built not on territory but on time shared. Now, as we drift toward the end of this journey, imagine history slowing its heartbeat. The rivers settle, the winds rest against the plains. Cities hum like lullabies beneath the stars. From the frozen bridge of Beringia to the crowded harbors of the present, humanity has walked a long, looping path. And here we are, still telling stories to make sense of it, still sipping something warm to stay awake just a little longer. So breathe with me, in and out. Let the centuries blur into colors and sound. Imagine the continent as one great sleeping creature, mountains rising and falling like its breath, rivers pulsing like veins of light. The people, the languages, the laughter, the pain, all part of one long dream that keeps finding new ways to begin again. And as the dream deepens, you can let go of dates and names. They've done their part. All that remains is the rhythm of history, steady, soothing, patient. It hums beneath everything. The creak of a porch swing, the rustle of a map, the whisper of wind through tall grass that remembers every footstep ever taken. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. You've traveled through centuries tonight without leaving your pillow. If you drifted off somewhere between Jamestown and the Golden Hills, that's perfectly fine. History will wait for you. And if this calm journey helped you unwind, you can tap like or subscribe, only if it feels right, and only when you're ready to wake again. Now the story is done. The fire has faded to embers. Let them glow softly as you rest. From the first footsteps on frozen ground to the quiet cities of today, The echoes of the continent fade into hush. The night holds them all, and it holds you too. Good night, my friend. Sweet dreams. Until next time, this has been Boring History for Sleep, whispered and waiting wherever your next dream begins.